Chapter 8, Part 2 of How I Found Livingstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. How I Found Livingstone by Sir Henry M. Stanley. Chapter 8, Part 2. My Life and Troubles during my residence in Unyanyembe. Towards evening we walked back to our own finely situated tembe in Kwihara, well satisfied with what we had seen at Tabora. My men drove a couple of oxen and carried 3 sacks of native rice, a most superior kind, the day's presents of hospitality from Khamis bin Abdullah. In Unyanyembe I found the Livingstone caravan, which started off in a fright from Bagamoyo upon the rumour that the English consul was coming. As all the caravans were now halted at Unyanyembe because of the now approaching war, I suggested to Sayd bin Salim that it were better that the men of the Livingstone caravan should live with mine in my tembe, that I might watch over the white men's goods. Sayd bin Salim agreed with me, and the men and goods were at once brought to my tembe. One day Asmani, who was now chief of Livingstone's caravan, the other having died of smallpox 2 or 3 days before, brought out a tent to the verandah where I was sitting writing, and showed me a packet of letters, which to my surprise was marked, "To Dr. Livingstone, Ujiji, November 1st, 1870, registered letters." From November 1st, 1870 to February 10th, 1871, just 100 days at Bagamoyo. A miserable small caravan of 33 men halting 100 days at Bagamoyo, only 25 miles by water from Zanzibar. Poor Livingstone! Who knows but he may be suffering for want of these very supplies that were detained so long near the sea. The caravan arrived at Unyanyembe some time about the middle of May. About the latter part of May the first disturbances took place. Had this caravan arrived here in the middle of March, or even in the middle of April, they might have travelled on to Ujiji without trouble. On the 7th of July, about 2 P.M., I was sitting on the bozani as usual. I felt listless and languid, and a drowsiness came over me. I did not fall asleep, but the power of my limbs seemed to fail me. Yet the brain was busy; all my life seemed passing in review before me. When these retrospective scenes became serious, I looked serious; when they were sorrowful, I wept hysterically; and when they were joyous, I laughed loudly. Reminiscences of yet a young life's battles and hard struggles came surging into the mind in quick succession. Events of boyhood, of youth and manhood, perils, travels, scenes, joys and sorrows, loves and hates, friendships and indifferences. My mind followed the various and rapid transition of my life's passages; it drew the lengthy, erratic, sinuous lines of travel my footsteps had passed over. If I had drawn them on the sandy floor, what enigmatical problems they had been to those around me, and what plain, readable, intelligent histories they had been to me. The loveliest feature of all to me was the form of a noble and true man who called me son. Of my life in the great pine forests of Arkansas and in Missouri I retained the most vivid impressions. The dreaming days I passed under the sighing pines on the Wahita's shores, the new clearing, the blockhouse, our faithful black servant, the forest deer, and the exuberant life I led, were all well remembered. And I remembered how one day, after we had come to live near the Mississippi, I floated down hundreds of miles, with a wild fraternity of gnurly giants, the boatmen of the Mississippi, and how a dear old man welcomed me back as if from the grave. I remembered also my travels on foot through sunny Spain and France, with numberless adventures in Asia Minor, among Kurdish nomads. I remembered the battlefields of America and the stormy scenes of rampant war. I remembered gold mines and broad prairies, Indian councils, and much experience in the new western lands. I remembered the shock it gave me to hear, after my return from a barbarous country, of the calamity that had overtaken the fond man whom I called father, and the hot, fitful life that followed it. Stop. Dear me, is it the 21st of July? Yes, Shaw informed me that it was the 21st of July after I recovered from my terrible attack of fever. The true date was the 14th of July, but I was not aware that I had jumped a week until I met Dr. Livingstone. We two together examined the nautical almanac, which I brought with me. We found that the doctor was 3 weeks out of his reckoning, and to my great surprise I was also 1 week out, or 1 week ahead of the actual date. The mistake was made by my being informed that I had been 2 weeks sick, and as the day I recovered my senses was Friday, and Shaw and the people were morally sure that I was in bed 2 weeks, I dated it on my diary the 21st of July. However, on the 10th day after the first of my illness, I was in excellent trim again, only, however, to see and attend to Shaw, who was in turn taken sick. By the 22nd of July, Shaw was recovered, and Selim was prostrated, and groaned in his delirium for 4 days, but by the 28th we were all recovered, and were beginning to brighten up at the prospect of a diversion in the shape of a march upon Mirambo's stronghold. The morning of the 29th I had 50 men loaded with bales, beads, and wire for Ujiji. When they were mustered for the march outside the tembe, the only man absent was Bombay. While men were sent to search for him, others departed to get one more look and one more embrace with their black Delilahs. Bombay was found some time about 2 P.M., his face faithfully depicting the contending passions under which he was labouring: sorrow at parting from the flesh pots of Unyanyembe, regret at parting from his Dulcinea of Tabora. To be bereft of all enjoyment now, nothing but marches, hard, long marches, to go to the war, to be killed perhaps. Oh, inspired by such feelings, no wonder Bombay was inclined to be pugnacious when I ordered him to his place, and I was in a shocking bad temper for having been kept waiting from 8 A.M. to 2 P.M. for him. There was simply a word and a savage look, and my cane was flying around Bombay's shoulders, as if he were to be annihilated. I fancy that the eager fury of my onslaught broke his stubbornness more than anything else, for before I had struck him a dozen times he was crying for pardon. At that word I ceased belabouring him, for this was the first time he had ever uttered that word. Bombay was conquered at last. "March!" and the guide led off, followed in solemn order by 49 of his fellows, every man carrying a heavy load of African moneys, besides his gun, hatchet, and stock of ammunition, and his ugali pot. We presented quite an imposing sight while thus marching on in silence and order, with our flags flying, and the red blanket robes of the men streaming behind them as the furious north easter blew right on our flank. The men seemed to feel they were worth seeing, for I noticed that several assumed a more martial tread as they felt their royal Joho cloth tugging at their necks, as it was swept streaming behind by the wind. Maganga, a tall Mnyamwezi, stalked along like a very Goliath about to give battle alone to Mirambo and his 1,000 warriors. Frisky Khamisi paced on under his load, imitating a lion, and there was the rude jester, the incorrigible Ulimengo, with a stealthy pace like a cat, but their silence could not last long. Their vanity was so much gratified, the red cloaks danced so incessantly before their eyes, that it would have been a wonder if they could have maintained such serious gravity or discontent 1/2 hour longer. Ulimengo was the first who broke it. He had constituted himself the kirangozi or guide, and was the standard bearer, bearing the American flag, which the men thought would certainly strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. Growing confident at first, then valorous, then exultant, he suddenly faced the army he was leading, and shouted, "Hoi, hoi!" Chorus, "Hoi, hoi!" "Where are you going?" Chorus, "Going to war." "Against whom?" Chorus, "Against Mirambo." "Who is your master?" Chorus, "The white men." "Oh, oh!" Chorus, "Ow, ow!" "Ya, ya!" Chorus, "Ya, ya!" This was the ridiculous song they kept up all day without intermission. We camped the first day at Bomboma's village, situated a mile to the south-west of the natural hill fortress of Zimbili. Bombay was quite recovered from his thrashing, and had banished the sullen thoughts that had aroused my ire, and the men having behaved themselves so well, a 5-gallon pot of pombe was brought, to further nourish the valour which they one and all thought they possessed. The second day we arrived at Masangi. I was visited soon afterwards by Soud, the son of Sayd bin Majid, who told me the Arabs were waiting for me, that they would not march from Mfuto until I had arrived. Eastern Mfuto, after a 6 hours' march, was reached on the 3rd day from Unyanyembe. Shaw gave in, laid down in the road, and declared he was dying. This news was brought to me about 4 P.M. by one of the last stragglers. I was bound to despatch men to carry him to me, into my camp, though every man was well tired after the long march. A reward stimulated